During this tutorial, we will focus on the general interface of Fawn, looking mostly at three different windows, which are the Welcome window, the Project Manager window, and the Session Editor window. And we will leave other interfaces, for example, about data queries, reports, and canned analyses for different tutorials. So in order to give you a sense of how Fawn works, instead of focusing on building a new project, which is the topic of other tutorials, what we'll do is look at how a finished project or a well-advanced project is organized within Fawn. So we already have the welcome window open here, and the welcome window has a few buttons for triggering actions, and we're covering those actions in other tutorials. And we also have the active workspace folder, which can be selected by the user depending on the needs. So here we have an active folder for the context of those tutorials, but in my Fawn setting, I could also move to a folder that I use to help with Fawn development, which is a completely different topic. So having different workspace folders will help you keep your work organized. So if I go back to the tutorial workspace here, we have 4 projects, one that was developed for other tutorials, and one that is a corpus downloaded from the FoundBank website, and finally 2 other projects here that are just built into Fawn to give you a sense of how cross-sectional and longitudinal studies are organized. So if we open the cross-sectional study, immediately by clicking on the study, that opens up the project manager for this particular project. And here we have 2 main columns that gives you the structure of the corpus itself, and for each corpus, the session transcripts corresponding to that corpus. And also in this window, you have indication as to where your folder is located on your hard drive and what media folder this project associates to, also on your hard drive. And it's possible to set, this is a preference for the entire cross-sectional study, but for some cases, sometimes it's useful to set different media folder for different corpora, and that would be set down here, where we could set a different media folder for the first corpus or for the second corpus if we had any need towards that. And finally, what you can do here is you can, for every corpus, you could type up a description if you need to, put some mnemonics there as to what each corpus was meant for, or basically information to help you contextualize your work. So here I could type my description of the corpus, for example. So going into this organization, we see that our first corpus contains 5 different session transcripts, and same for the second corpus. So they're structured identically, and you can, once you click on the corpus, you see the session transcripts, and you can go in any one of those session transcripts, which will open the session editor. The session editor here is opening with one interface, an interface that I used for other work this morning. But what matters, and so this is very appropriate here, good morning. And so what matters here is that the interface in Fawn is a very, very flexible system that enables you to configure the view panels you need, so that you can do your work as efficiently as possible. So I will begin by showing you a few of elements in this interface, and afterwards I will show you how we can play around to modify this interface, and also to save it, in case we have it configured for one specific need that helps in our research. And the one thing to keep in mind here is that the configuration of the interface is completely independent from the Fawn data itself, which means that even if you remove an element in the interface, it does not delete the data that corresponds to that element. It's just, those are just you can think about every one of those view panels as a program, an individual program, and in this sense you can think about Fawn as a combination of programs that work together within a unified interface. So if we start with what would be the Fawn default interface, this gives us already a sense of how the interface is working, in that we can go in the view menu, and the view menu supports a series of different layouts, the default layouts that come with Fawn, and also some layouts that you can create yourself, and we will get back to this. And so with the top part of this menu here, you can see you can load different layouts, you can delete them or save the current layout, and we'll get to this as well. Below that first organization section, what we have are the view panels that can go into a Fawn interface, for the session editor. So, and the view panels are organized by, whether they focus on the session itself, whether they focus on different records, whether they relate to the media files, and we also have a few utilities, and here there's a place for a plugin that I won't address here. This is a different project that's not relevant for our tutorial here. And where the interface is meant to be as useful as possible is in the fact that it can be completely configured for your own needs. So here's the default interface, which we offer there mostly to help people that are beginners in Fawn. So the interface opens up with the session information, which is necessary to fill up if you want to link your session transcript to an audio file, for example. And also the timeline being the function that we use to start segmenting our data records. So in this particular case, we're not involved in segmentation because we already have the work done. But what matters here is to see that the timeline interface gives us access to the WAV file and the speech segments that are recorded within that WAV file. So on the left-hand side of it is the media player, and the media player is mostly important when we use a video file, and we don't have a video file here, so I will allow myself to just remove the media player from my interface. And at the bottom of this interface we have the data records, and here is the bare bones set of tiers that come with Fawn, but we could add user-defined tiers to those tiers as well, and this is also something that I will talk about in a few minutes. So we can open and close these windows from within. Well, we can open these windows using the view menu, and so if we were to add if we were to add a view panel to Fawn, the one trick to know that's really useful to know is that the view panel will open on top of the active view panel. So here my record data is active, but I could make the timeline my active view panel, and then go in my view menu and load, let's say, my media player, in which case the media player is loading on top of my active view panel. And which, like immediately we could see a problem there, but it's not a problem, it's just that we are missing one step for configuration, which always goes by grabbing the title bar of the view we want to move around. And so we click and hold, and then we can start moving it, and Fawn will give us a preview of where that view would land at the moment where we release our mouse. So if I want my media player to show up in the bottom right hand side of my screen, I can bring it here and let go my mouse, and that gives me the media player in that location. And then what I can do is move the little boundaries to give it its due place within my interface. And as I mentioned earlier, every function of Fawn is assembled within one of these view panels, and we have several functions. So if we go back to the view menu, we can see that we have functions that relate to managing the session itself, or that apply to the session as a whole, and other views that correspond to other functions. And here I will bring up a new one called syllabification and alignment that relate to how phones are syllabified using color coding and aligned in a one-to-one fashion between the target form and the actual form. So if we want to appreciate that here, we have the orthography, which is irrelevant to this side of the interface, but we have the IP target and how it is syllabified. So the initial W here is syllabified as an onset using the coded with the color blue, and the T of what and the T of it are both syllabified, just like the Z of is, in syllable codas, and the nuclei are in red. And if we look at the alignment here, we get the same idea for target and actual, but what matters here is not syllabification, even though we could display syllabification in the interface. But what matters here is that we're looking at how Fawn could perform sound by sound comparisons. And here we don't have too much action taking place, but if we look at other records, then we can see, back to record 6, we can see, for example, that the learner here wanted to say thank you and produce thank you instead. And that comes with, you know, an alignment here whereby Fawn will be able to detect in queries or analyses a case of a th sound produced as f. So going back to our interface, this flexibility enables us to set the visual interface and the related functions the way that we want to use them in Fawn. And there's great benefits to that, in that sometimes we have an interface like the timeline that occupies that ideally should, you know, use as, you know, a lot of screen space as possible, real estate as possible, because it enables us to put the productions in their own in their proper context relative to other productions. So that's kind of useful. And also, if I were to look at another interface, and here I will bring up the speech analysis interface. Again, here this is a pretty space-intensive interface, because it gives you the waveform, it gives you the spectrogram or the spectral view for that waveform, and it also gives you a visualization for the corresponding text grid. The speech analysis interface is where we have the functions that all relate to Pratt. And so that interface is best seen in a relatively large view, where the user can again here put the visuals in their proper context. And this is different from something like syllabification and alignment, which typically won't require much space in the context where the utterances are fairly short. But should you be working on long utterances, then you may want to configure your interface to account for that. So once you've arrived at the interface that serves your needs for your analysis, and here what I could do is play a little bit with my interface, moving the boundaries left and right and up and down, then I could obtain an interface that could be useful here, for example, to look at my IP transcriptions, look at their syllabification, and maybe study some reflex of those in the acoustic signal. So once we have an interface that fits our needs, then what we can do is go in the View menu and save our layout for this interface. And I will call it my preferred layout. And at this point, Fawn has saved your layout within a preference file, and which means that now we can return, let's say, to a basic layout and do some work or reset, you know, when we want to start like building a new layout from scratch, or we can go back and load what would be our preferred layout here, and Fawn will automatically bring back the layout we just saved.